I survived a harrowing, supernatural encounter, and I know that no one will believe me, even though I have camera footage of the attack. I was never the kind of person who believed in the things you read in tabloids, flying saucers, the Bat Boy, Bigfoot, but perhaps it's the kind of person who doesn't believe who is affected by a surprise like mine so acutely. I don't often let fear get the best of me. I'm a creature of solitude, in many ways, and it wouldn't do to be frightened by anything I see in the shadows, especially when I prefer to linger in them so much. You see, I'm a meteor shower junkie, and the view from the city just isn't all it's cracked up to be. To get the best view, you need to head to the countryside and find a place deep in the wilderness where there's no light pollution. Sometimes you get a good look at a fireball from a quiet beach, but even then, it's hit or miss. What you really want is someplace that's supposed to be dark. And one of my favorite places is, or was, Calvin Price State Forest in West Virginia. Cal Price is just around the corner from Watauga State Park, and it's nearly 10,000 square acres of undeveloped land. It's perfect for someone who wants to get away from it all, and it doubles as a really great place for someone who likes celestial events like me. On the week of April 21st, 2024, the sight of the Lyrids in the sky was going to be at its peak, with around 10 meteors per hour streaking across the heavens. I headed up to Cal Price that preceding Friday. You can usually see the meteors as early as April 15th, so I figured I would get an early start, make sure I had all my camping supplies, and find a spot that I liked. You can't go very far into Cal Price with a vehicle. It's a designated dark park, and because of that, it's become a hotspot for stargazing. That means most artificial lights are banned, and that includes car headlights. Most of those 10,000 square acres are reached solely by hiking. And sure, there are places where groups can look at the sky together. But as I said, I'm a creature of solitude. The only problem is, I wasn't the only one. After stocking up on provisions and arriving at the parking lot near the trailhead, I grabbed hold of my large capacity backpack and headed on my way. Watauga would have been the more popular tourist attraction for an event like the Lyrids, so I felt pretty confident in my decision to go it alone in Cal Price. Still, I'm nothing if not pragmatic, so I made sure that I was close to Burnside Ridge on the Ann Bailey trailhead, just in case things didn't go as planned. With satellite maps I had printed out, I knew that I could find my way to Laurel Run, and then to one of several clearings near the border of Cal Price and Watauga. Sure enough, after hiking for just over an hour and stopping at Laurel Run to give my back a break, I found the clearing I was looking for. After all the driving and hiking I was plenty tired, but as the evening approached and the skies grew dark, I felt renewed and refreshed. A big part of me wanted nothing more than to set up my telescope and my radio, but I knew that once I put my telescope together, there would be no prying me away from it. The promise of meteors streaking across the sky would keep me too distracted, and I wouldn't have the energy to put up my tent or set up my campfire. I wouldn't likely do any cooking in the evening. It wouldn't have affected the light too much. But I had already thought that I would only be making a fire during the daylight hours. I was doing future me a favor and making sure that I could make a nice breakfast for myself. By the time I had my campsite readied, the sky was a deep azure color. My telescope was already unpacked, and I only had to stand it up and point it toward Vega. But that was when the first peculiarities happened. Before I could align anything, I saw the first object streaking across the sky. Even then, I should have thought better about what I experienced. The Lyrids are known for traveling fast, leaving what looks like a bright blue or white trail behind them. What I saw was slow, almost looking like it was hovering across the sky, and more importantly, it left a deep red trail behind it. Just observing it seemed to have my stomach doing cartwheels. I don't know how long I stood there, just watching it with the naked eye. But after I was able to pull myself from my trance, I scrambled to get my telescope ready. Once it was put together, I hurried to do one last thing. My telescope has a phone mount, as I figured whatever this strange meteor or other object was, it would serve me best to get it on camera. Once everything snapped into place, I swiped through the camera app, set it to video, and then the sky was empty. Sure, I saw hundreds of stars and the thin, waning crescent moon, just what you would expect to see from Cal Price. But the mysterious red object was gone. Even then, I was wondering if maybe fatigue had me seeing things that weren't there. The rest of the evening went by uneventfully. That early in the weekend, the Lyrids weren't yet at their peak, so there were only 2 or 3 more meteors that I saw before I felt too tired to go on. I collapsed my telescope and crawled into my tent with it. I didn't want the morning moisture fogging up the lens. As I laid down, using my empty pack as a pillow, I couldn't help but allow my mind to drift back to the red streak I had seen. It was rare to see a meteor with that color, and it would have meant an uncommon composition. It wouldn't have traveled with the Lyrids, but would have arrived in our skyline at a coincidental time. If only I could have set my telescope up in time. The next day, I woke up with a ravenous appetite. I suppose I was distracted before bed because I hadn't eaten anything after I had set everything up, though I had some dry food, like jerky, which could have helped deal with some hunger pangs a bit. I opted to make an old favorite of mine. Whenever my dad would take my brother and I camping when we were younger, we always made tacos. It's super easy to make on a fire if you have a pan. I prepared mine with ground meat, cheese, and powdered eggs to make it feel more like a breakfast treat. Saturday morning passed uneventfully. I heard some folks making their way down Laurel Run, but whether they noticed my tent or not, I don't know. I was content to read inside, the flap open to let some sunlight in, to hit the pages of an academic science book I was invested in. I had thought to scroll through the internet on my phone, but thought better of wasting the battery. Even though I had a power bank, I wanted to be over-prepared. A nap suited me just fine as well, and it would leave me with extra energy as the night hours set in. I made sure I was prepared well in advance on Saturday night. My telescope and my camera were already in position, and I had a radio playing through my laptop with an SDR flash drive plugged into it. You can use it to listen to meteors when they pass by, as it makes a noise when it bounces back radio frequencies. I would keep my laptop shut and just listen to the sound of the receiver, set at 143.0485 megahertz. If an audible ping sounded, I knew that there was a meteor on the way. The Lyrids were astounding that night, with over 10 visible every hour. I had incredible shots lined up on my phone camera, and for a while I thought maybe some stargazing communities would go wild over what I shot. Shortly after midnight, the SDR receiver went quiet. The Lyrids weren't as active as before, and I wondered what could have been causing such a strange turn of events. There were no clouds, the sliver of the moon still visible. My stomach turned, and I could sense a copper taste on the back of my tongue. I knew it before I saw it. The red fireball had returned. I looked to the northwest, and I could see it take shape, as though it had appeared from thin air. I studied it intently, trying to ensure it wasn't the light from a plane, but I was certain it was just what it had been the night before, something completely indescribable. It was then that I realized my SDR tuner was not pinging. If it was a meteor, I would have heard the telltale signs. That could only mean that whatever was flying through the sky was closer. I swallowed away the tension in my throat, and I hurried to stand behind my telescope. To my surprise, the camera didn't pick up the red glow. I angled the telescope a bit to ensure that I had it pointed in the right direction, and I looked at it once more with the naked eye to ensure I wasn't crazy. there it was, still lingering in the sky. I plucked my phone from the mount and pointed it out in front of me, ensuring it was facing exactly where I was. But just as when it was recording through the telescope, it couldn't pick anything up. The sound of the radio frequency from my USB dongle suddenly stopped altogether, and I looked at my laptop to see if it had died. The power light was still on. I looked back up to the sky, fully expecting the red light to have vanished as it had the night before, but it still lingered there. But with it, a strange fog had settled into the area. It hadn't been there a moment before, and I wondered if perhaps I had been caught in a fugue state, losing track of time. I shook my head though, willing away any doubts. I remembered looking at the forecast for the area, and it didn't say anything about fog. Something else was happening, and I couldn't explain it. I opened my phone's camera app once more, determined to capture the red flying object. I just couldn't see it in my camera. And what was stranger yet, my camera didn't see the fog either. As if it was mocking me, the strange object began to slowly depart. I took a few steps after it, as though I could somehow give pursuit. And then, it plummeted from the sky. I expected a crash, or for the ground beneath my feet to quake as it descended beyond the trees to the east. But it merely disappeared, its flaring red light illuminating the area for just a second as it dropped beyond my vision. For some reason that I still cannot explain, I started walking in that direction. Before I knew it, I was beneath the thick forest canopy, no light in my hand, somehow enveloped in darkness. Sound became my solace. I could hear birds calling nearby, owls and nightjars, and crickets chirped all around me. In the distance, the faint sound of my radio hummed into the night, but there was another noise undulating far beneath, a deep pitch thrumming like a bass note left to reverberate across all of Calvin Price State Forest. Before long, the sound of my radio had dissipated, and I could only feel the strange mechanical hum beneath my feet. Despite my better judgment, I went forward, almost as if I was looking for where the noise originated from. A pungent aroma filled the air, and my stomach felt turned further, as though it was doing somersaults, even though I was standing upright. I leaned against a tree, ready to expel the contents of my stomach. Before I could do so, however, I noticed that the near darkness around me has subsided. Instead, a deep crimson filled the air, not unlike the streak of light I had seen in the sky. Though it was strange and unsettling, I had a need to see what was happening. Had I just happened upon a fallen meteorite? The light pulsed and faded, only to return moments later. I continued forward, my intrigue winning over my fear. The thrum pounded in my ear, and I felt compelled to stop. After every pulse of darkness that interrupted the red glow, there was a split second where I could see a figure in the woods. At first, I thought it was one of the trees, but once my eyes adjusted, I knew it was not so. It was at that moment that I somehow remembered that the phone was still in my hand. Despite having it all that time, I hadn't thought to use the flashlight app. Not until then, anyway. Slowly, I raised my hand and tapped the screen where the flashlight button was. At once, the blinding white light from my phone joined with the intermittent red that pulsed in the forest. But there was a pair of red lights which didn't fade, and they belonged to the figure that stood there before me. Towering at least 5 feet over me, the creature had arms that were nearly as long as I was tall. It looked to be wearing some sort of garment that swept up behind its head that looked pointed, like the ace of spades. Perhaps it was a hood, but it didn't cover its face, and I could see its glowing red eyes, and knew that it was investigating me as surely as I was investigating it. A strange, large robe flowed to the ground too, hiding any other appendages, but its arms had my attention again anyway. It raised one of them and pointed a long, bony finger at me, and I noticed the razor-sharp claw upon it. My heart was already thumping so hard I thought it would burst from my chest, and then it screamed. It wasn't the noise a person would make, but more like a hiss that would come from a cat, only much louder and more pronounced. It glided toward me as if it could fly, and it covered the ground quicker than I expected. I dropped my phone. The flashlight was pointed up, toward the canopy. The creature was no longer illuminated, but its red eyes still pierced through the darkness. For whatever reason, I lingered there just long enough to grab my phone again, and I used it to light the way as I turned back the way I came. That time, I urged my legs on, fully aware of what I was doing. It felt like I was running for miles, and every step along the way, the hissing sound could be heard right behind me, and I could swear I felt the creature's breath on the back of my neck. My stomach still tossed and turned, but I was too frightened to let it overpower me. Before I realized it, I could see the stars overhead once more. In just 100 more feet or so, I would reach my camp. And then, even with the moon lending its light to the field, I hadn't noticed the reflection upon my telescope, or the material of my tent. I crashed into the telescope, tripping over it. We both went down, and I struck my head against one of the rocks surrounding my campfire. I felt a stinging pain then, and I struggled to open my eyes. But when I did, I noticed that my phone had fallen from my hands, the flashlight nearly blinding me. I reached out and grabbed hold of it, panic gripping me as I flipped it over and turned the camera on. I clicked the button to change which camera I was using, pointing it toward me instead. When I didn't see the creature behind me, the thumping in my chest slowed just a bit. But then I heard the strange hissing once more, and I recalled what had happened earlier. The camera hadn't seen the fog, hadn't seen the red object in the sky, and now it seemed it didn't see the creature either. I let my gaze drift farther out, spotting a subtle reflection in the lens of my telescope. Sure enough, the creature towered behind me. My last regret that night was that my camera wouldn't capture those following moments.